Today, we're tackling a question that keeps compliance officers, medical affairs, and market access teams awake at night. Have you crossed the line between scientific exchange and marketing in payer presentations? Well, why does this matter? Because the line is blurrier than ever, and crossing it can trigger serious regulatory exposure and even DOJ attention. So let's discuss the problem. When manufacturers sit down with payers like formulary committees, PBMs, or a hospital system, they want to share clinical and economic data. After all, payers demand more than what's actually on just the FDA label. They want real-world evidence, they want comparative studies, and forward-looking projections. FDA guidance acknowledges this. There's room for firms to share healthcare economic information, even about unapproved uses or pre-approval products, provided, and this is important, it's truthful and non-misleading, and this includes being properly contextualized. Congress even tried to codify the space through the Pre-Approval Information Exchange Act, commonly known as PI. But here's the catch. Not everything that feels like scientific exchange really qualifies as such. And when you cross into promotion, you invite the FDA, FTC, OIG, and even plaintiffs' attorneys. So where does that line get crossed? Let's actually consider 3 separate tips that you might want to consider. Number 1, cherry-picking data. If your slides only highlight a favorable subgroup analysis while burying limitations in the appendix, that would likely be deemed to be promotional spin, and that's problematic. The use of economic models without caveats. Sharing a cost savings model can be valuable, but you must disclose your assumptions and avoid presenting it as fact, because that would cross over into misleading marketing. Finally, talking about future indications. Now, it's allowed for you to talk about investigational use as is permitted if it's framed as investigational. You need clear disclaimers. Do not blur that line. Do not suggest that it's imminent or inevitable. Payers are a sophisticated audience, and the FDA expects them to evaluate data critically. But sophistication does not absolve manufacturers. Manufacturers must be truthful, non-misleading, and must be transparent. Enforcement risk is not theoretical. It's not just academic. We've seen the Department of Justice's Healthcare Fraud Task Force launch cases where economic and clinical claims and payer presentations became the foundation of False Claims Act allegations. In fact, in our earlier podcast on the DOJ's new Healthcare Fraud Task Force, we discussed how enforcers are now laser-focused on misrepresentations. Think about it. If a payer covers your drug because you pitched a questionable economic model, this claim could later be attacked as fraud. That fraud could face scrutiny from the FDA, DOJ, OIG, and sometimes state attorney generals. So, how do you walk the line carefully? Follow our page on LinkedIn. Number 1, ground everything in competent and reliable scientific evidence. Notice, the standard is not necessarily substantial evidence, it is competent and reliable scientific evidence. The phrase comes straight from the statute, and if your model cannot withstand peer review, do not put it in front of a payer. Use disclosures generously. FDA guidance recommend clear and prominent disclaimers. Don't be using 8-point font. Number 3, involve compliance early. Far too often, market access teams must prepare decks, and those decks must go through legal review. Number 4, discuss and document the rationale and who you're sharing the information with. And this is where CERIS comes in. Our system allows you to track what data was shared and what disclosures were included and what assumptions underpin your models and who received the information. If OIG ever knocks, you want that audit trail. At the Kulkarni Law Firm, we routinely help companies distinguish between legitimate scientific exchange and impermissible promotion. We don't just say, here's a green light or red light answer. We work with your teams, we create playbooks, we say what's safe and what needs disclaimers, and what should never leave the MLR process. Again, we're not shy about reminding clients, once you cross that line, it's not just FDA letters you need to worry about, it's subpoenas, it's depositions, it's potential treble damages. And that's why investing in compliance today can save millions tomorrow. Think of it as your insurance program. So, have you seen payer presentations that felt more like a sales pitch than a scientific dialogue? If you're listening, pause and reflect. How often does your team blur that line? Drop me a note. I'd love to hear your experiences. Did the payers push back? Did compliance flag it? Or do you wonder if that deck's going to be Exhibit A in a DOJ file 5 years down the road? Here's the bottom line. Scientific exchange with payers is both permitted and expected, but that should not make your science into marketing. Once you've done that, you've stepped onto thin ice. The new DOJ Healthcare Fraud Task Force has made it clear it's an area that they're focusing on, they're watching, and they're ready to act. That's why tools like Saraswat tracking are great. Working with experienced counsel at the Kulkarni law firm is probably not just best practices, it's a safeguard for your company's future. Want to hear more? Check out that podcast I was talking about on the DOJ Task Force. And as always, reach out to the Kulkarni law firm if you want to review your payer decks before the regulators do. Thanks again for tuning in. Call, click, or email